Our next speaker, Ashley Bell, shares an ambitious vision with Dr. Bernice King, daughter of the Atlanta-based civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His vision is to empower underserved communities financially. Together, Ashley and Bernice have co-founded fintech platform ReadyLife, and they've led the acquisition of a nationally chartered bank in Utah and launched Ready Entertainment, a production company dedicated to creating movies and TV shows with strong social justice messages. Ashley is the former White House Policy Advisor for Entrepreneurship and Innovation in the Office of American Innovation, and he was previously appointed by the White House in February 2018 to serve as Regional Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration, serving Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, and Missouri. Ashley is also a celebrated attorney. He's been named one of America's top 40 attorneys under 40 by the American Bar Association and a National Impact Leader of the Year by Impact DC, and he was also a 21st Century Leadership Fellow at the Harvard University JFK School of Government. To facilitate this conversation with Ashley, we also welcome DeHavia Stewart. DeHavia is an accomplished venture investor, including fintech investments, with prior roles at Anthemis Ventures and the SoftBank Opportunity Fund. She is currently an Atlanta-based investor at Serena Ventures. Sounds familiar, yes? That is the VC firm founded by tennis legend Serena Williams. For a very special main stage conversation, please join me in welcoming DeHavia Stewart and Ashley Bell.
Hello, everybody. It's a great echo. I love it.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. Very excited to be here with Ashley, as mentioned. Just to give you a brief background on myself, I've spent the past 3 years of my career working in venture capital and have been able to help deploy $40 million into early stage fintech companies led by Black and brown people. So very excited about this discussion. As mentioned, Ashley Bell, founder of Redemption Bank. So earlier, about 2 years ago, you acquired a bank in Utah and now has rebranded it to Redemption Bank, and then also founder of ReadyLife, a solution that helps increase access to mortgages. So I think the parallel between both of our careers is centered around like increasing access to the financial system. And so to kick it off, we'd love to hear more about like why you are passionate about that.
Well, first off, you forgot that you were a Florida A&M alum grad, so I got to say that. It is so important to see people like you in your space being HBCU grads that know how to understand how to evaluate a deal and working with folks like Serena. So applause to you. Give her a round of applause. She's only 26 years old. You know, that's just a huge accomplishment for yourself. You know, we are as strong as the people around us who believe in us, and you know, I'm fortunate enough to have as a co-founder of that really long list of things that Mike mentioned as Dr. Bernice King. And I think if you're coming to Atlanta and you haven't been here before, welcome to Atlanta. Go stop by the King Center while you're there. You're in a special city. This is the cradle of the civil rights movement. Atlanta influences everything and always has. But even in the fintech space, you see and you'll hear from some of the most critical fintechs in the space of closing the racial wealth gap, founded right here in Atlanta. And we're proud to be a part of that story because our fintech is really specific. ReadyLife is singularly focused on closing the racial wealth gap through helping people get underwritten for owning a home without a credit score. Now, many of you probably have heard a lot of people talk about underwriting off of auto loans and lots of other platforms that will use other data. But nobody's really touched the core of what separates wealth in our country, which allows for African Americans to only have 10% of the wealth as white Americans, that creates a system where only 42% of black people own a home, 75% of white Americans own a home. That in itself is the wealth gap. And we're going right to the heart of it by underwriting people based off of cash flow, which we believe is much more credible than understanding people's debt utilization and the algorithms that are currently being used.
Wow, that's incredible. And with Redemption Bank, it's co-founded with Bernice King, MLK's daughter. So how did that come about? There's a lot of conversations you'll get about neobanks and fintechs. And the reality is, ReadyLife, we function as banking as a service. So if you download us on Google or Apple Store, it'll feel like your checking account. The difference is that people bank with us because we take the direct deposit, we take the information for how they spend money, and we turn that into useful data for banks. Our customers are banks, as well as there are people that live in marginalized communities. We're CRA as a service for banks. And for those who know what that is, that's Community Reinvestment Act. The Community Reinvestment Act is what all banks have to abide by and do loans in areas that were formerly redlined. Redlining meaning these are places where banks just didn't loan to people of color, and many times, basically every ethnic group has been subject to redlining at some point. And so we help banks go into those areas and originate loans by showing them that people are more than a credit score, that we can tell a different narrative that can actually show that if someone is paying $3,000 a month in rent and they use it through our app and we're able to show them, hey, these people have been paying rent for $3,000 a month, why wouldn't they pay a mortgage at $2,500 a month if it's less than what they were already paying? So let's find them a product that allows them to get access to create wealth for their families. And so when we talk about that in the bank, Dr. King and I have just been trying to attack this issue that her father talked about. In his final speech in Memphis, Dr. King talked about calling for a banking in movement, a movement by where people of goodwill will bank their values, meaning that you're all banking somewhere. You're putting your hard-earned dollars in some bank somewhere. And the question is, does that bank reflect the values that you have for your family, for your kids? Far too many headlines still show up in our newspapers that show discriminatory practices in lending. And what the civil rights movement was about, that Dr. King led and so many others, was about protesting with our dollar, putting our money in places that reflect the values that we wanted. Whether there were sit-in counters in Atlanta and you focused on only shopping at places or patronizing places that allow African Americans to eat there, or schools that would allow African Americans to be admitted, or banks that treat people fairly and don't discriminate. Either way, whether you choose to do something or not in moving your money, understand it's still a choice, whether you leave your money in a bank that doesn't reflect your values or not. So we felt there needed to be an African American owned bank that could lean into technology, because right now, every single fintech that's black owned or otherwise, there's no black owned bank that they can sit on top of. If you're talking about ReadyLife, you're talking about Greenwood, you're talking about Cash App, doesn't matter. They all sit on top of some bank, and many of them, as you know, market to these groups, these affinity groups or these ethnic groups or these niche groups in different communities, and none of those people control the banks to sit on top of. So to follow up on that, when it comes to these neobanks that target different affinity groups and they're not actually serving as the bank that holds the assets, do you think that they're actually helping tackle the problem, or what role do you think they play in this ecosystem?
Well, I think that's the core of what Dr. King and I leaned into, is that there aren't any real options. There's one bank, this women-run bank that you could use as a fintech bank, platform bank. But outside of that, there's no minority owned. There's no MDIs that I could say, you know what, I would rather my bank sit on top of this MDI, because the reality is if I go 3 blocks from here to Castleberry Hills and I get a haircut, my African-American barber that's on MLK is going to ask me to pay him in Cash App. Cash App does a really good job of marketing to people in our community. They do. It's on every rap song. I heard 2 rap songs on the way here in the Uber that talk about Cash App. They're going to spend that money. And so for us, I'm moving my money out of a black-owned bank in Atlanta attached to my Cash App and paying my barber, but that dollar is now going to sit at a bank that's nowhere near Atlanta. That bank does not have one minority on its board. That bank is not reinvesting what I know the black banks in Atlanta are reinvesting in this community. So there has to be a minority-owned bank that has that same capability so that whoever out there is the next fintech entrepreneur that's thinking about leaning into this space, that there could be a bank that you could work with that could actually recirculate that money in communities and create jobs and opportunity for the people that live there.
Wow, that's amazing. And you talked a little bit about the importance of like why you all created Redemption Bank. Would love to hear more about the process of actually acquiring a bank. Like, what does that actually look like?
You know, there's only 20 African-American owned banks in this country. The night that my co-founder's father was assassinated, there was 145. We're in 2023 with only 20 black banks, and we had 145 at the apex of the civil rights movement. There's a reason for that. African-American banks struggle because black people struggle. Black businesses generally struggle because they're in communities that are fragile. And if you talk to any black bank president, they will tell you, I know the number of the unemployment rate for black people to tell you the day I close my doors. And African-American unemployment has always been higher than everybody else's for systemic reasons. So for us, buying this bank in Utah that clearly is not a very diverse place, if you want to look at it that way, but it does have the best regulations. I think everybody in here who's in business or technology, you look at a regulatory environment before you jump into anything. And so for us, it was finding a good regulatory environment by which we could deploy the technology we wanted and needed to be able to reach people no matter where they were. And we bought a bank that had zero delinquencies on its books. And so now we're the only African-American bank in the country that would have zero delinquencies, giving us a sounder portfolio by which we could be more strategic about how we reach and serve the communities around the country.
Wow, that makes perfect sense. And did you think about like applying for a bank charter before acquiring the bank, or what was that like?
I mean, the ticket, the price would have been the same probably, but we felt, you know, banks are not like fintechs. Everybody in here who's ever had to pitch to your investors, they want to see the hockey stick. You know, when you tell them about your fintech, every investor's like, okay, when am I going to get my money out? When does it hit the inflection point where you go from this to this? Well, banks can't do that. They shouldn't do that. So the regulators don't let you grow that fast. So the older your bank is and the longer the history that the bank has, the more leeway the regulators will let you have in growing because they see that you've had a track record of success. If you buy a new bank, you have extraordinary restrictions on you about how fast you can grow. So buying an existing concern that has 40 years of experience in the marketplace and you keep intact some of the key pieces of leadership gives us a much better trajectory to grow than if we were starting from scratch and would be stymied by regulatory pressures to not be able to grow so fast.
So what is the roadmap right now for Redemption Bank? Like, what can we see coming in like the coming years?
You know, what's important for us is to build a bank that African-American business owners and people who aren't African-American who want to bank their values, a place where they can bank and put their deposits in and know that their money's going to work while they're asleep. To know that tonight, when you're going to bed with your families, that your money's sitting in a bank that's doing the hard work, that's going to make sure that people who don't have the opportunities you have get access to loans, to credit. Because at the end of the day, credit is like water. If you find me a community that is a desert of opportunity, I'll show you a community that doesn't have access to credit. Where credit flows, opportunity grows. Where credit does not flow, things starve out. So we have to create more riverways and more waterways of credit to flow to the people that need it the most. And the best way to do that is for you to put your money in a bank that reflects your value so they can turn that spigot on to places that you may never go, people you may never meet. But you can help them by making sure that you are banking according to the values that you have for yourself.
And so if you believe that is the solution to the problem, then do you believe that we need more minority-owned banks and financial institutions?
Well, I think that for any business to thrive, you got to be able to do business with everybody, of every color, of every race, of every background. If I can tell you that most black banks have 90% of their customers are black. Would they be bigger and stronger if they were more integrated? Yeah, they would. Would they be able to serve more people in the mission-driven purposes? Yes, they would. So they're going to give you the same rates that you're going to get. Unfortunately, banking is pretty competitive and the rules are very tight. So why not bank somewhere? And let me just give you an example of why Atlanta's so special. Because Dr. King and I also founded a foundation together called the National Black Bank Foundation. And we serve as technical assistants for black-owned banks. And right here in Atlanta, right after George Floyd, we did the first time in America a deal with the Atlanta Hawks. They had a Brookwood practice facility they were building, a $35 million deal. Because of Tony Ressler, the owner of the Hawks, and the CFO, they said, look, Ashley, what if we gave you a chance to let black banks finance this deal? And I said, look, there isn't a black bank big enough to do this deal, but if you let me bundle them together into an all-black bank syndicate, I could probably take down this deal. So with that encouragement, in November of 2020 was the first time in America that a sporting arena was ever financed 100% by black banks. And the only reason that happened, because you're in a city like Atlanta, and you got an owner like the Hawks that took ATL off his jerseys and put MLK on their jerseys, and those jerseys go to benefit my co-founder's nonprofit, the King Center for Nonviolence. That is an example of how can you bank your values. You have a company like the Atlanta Hawks that has players that are black and brown and come from these communities that are in these deserts, and you say, how can I impact those communities? And you say, well, what if I just bank with the banks that their mama needs, their aunts need, that their church uses, that they grew up? Let me just give them a shot. So without spending one extra dime, all the Hawks did was align their values in a way that allowed 11 banks around this country, from Detroit to LA to Houston, to all participate in a loan. And the one thing we all learned from COVID is that when every other business was struggling, the ball never stopped bouncing for NBA. They played every game. They built the bubble, the box, whatever it was. They bounced the ball and they made sure they had a champion. And what we can show those banks is that they won't miss a check. When the barbecue shop is struggling, when the building fund at the church sometimes may come up short, they will have a check from the NBA because they'll figure it out.
Yeah, wow, that's a really cool syndicate deal. Do you think that something like that is unique to Atlanta, or do you think there are other areas where something like that can be duplicated?
We started it in Atlanta, and we're proud to say that from that deal to today, we've done deals with Major League Baseball, with Major League Soccer as a league. We just closed a $76 million deal with the National Football League. We're at $950 million of deal flow since George Floyd, because of Atlanta, what Atlanta started, and why Atlanta influences everything.
Wow, that's amazing. So to pivot back to ReadyLife, you talked about your unique approach or algorithm to underwriting different minority groups. You know, artificial intelligence is top of mind. Have you thought about utilizing that technology to help with your algorithm or your workflow at all?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest reason that people come to us to help them navigate working with banks that need CRA credit is because there is a distrust of banks with black people. And a lot of people, not just black people, there's a lot of distrust, especially now with the mini crisis we had. A lot of people are not really high on banks. So we lean in with trust, but we understand that there are reasons that African Americans and others have been disenfranchised in this industry, and we try to use technology to alleviate that. So for example, you know, as we start rolling out our mortgages, we make sure that we protect our customers from appraisal discrimination. Appraisal discrimination is huge. I mean, I didn't know this until I got into this industry, that 97% of all appraisers are white men. And how many times have we seen in the last year, from 60 Minutes to the New York Times to the Washington Post, specifically women who, when they got their house appraised, if they were single, were getting lower valuations than their neighbors. If they were black, I mean, there was a couple, a very celebrated couple we saw made national news of a white male married to a black woman, and he had to ask his wife to leave the house because When they got the appraisal with them there with their kids in the house, they had 30% less valuation than their neighbors. But when she left and he took the pictures down, it went up by 40%. So that's such a discriminatory, arbitrary way of doing things. Technology can fill in the gap here. So, you always have to put rails on things, but AI, and we work with Figure Technologies, and with Figure in that partnership, you're able to do automated valuations that take away human discriminatory factors in appraising your home. You can use drones, you can use all the data that's necessary, and you don't have to worry about somebody coming to your house getting jealous that your food smells too good, or your kids are too cute, or whatever they want to say about you to make it so your house isn't worth what you say what you know it should be. So using technology, we can come in and take that human error out, so people know that when they go get a HELOC or they go to get a home, that they're getting fair market value and they're not being discriminated against because of something that they can't control.
Can you talk a little bit more about ReadyLife and like what you guys actually do within the mortgage lending process?
So for us, it's really simple. People bank with us. We see how they spend their money, and we're able to give them financial literacy training. We're also able to help them put their best foot forward to get ready to own a home. But the biggest thing we do is we say, look, if you're in a CRA assessment area of a bank, meaning that these banks get assessed and CRA credits are needed in a certain area, we can say, look, there's special programs for you. We just partnered with a bank that's a $150 billion bank out of New York that's like, look, if one of your Ready customers is in one of our CRA areas, we're willing to not have to hang our hat on a credit score. We're willing to do no money down and no PMI. And this is a win-win, because the reality is CRA credits were built so that you can create more loans in formerly redlined areas. But unfortunately, far too many times, banks have used them and weaponized them against the communities that it's supposed to help by creating gentrification. So when you have a situation where the credit is based on geography, and then you get new people coming into a community, tearing down old homes, building really nice homes, well, that loan technically is a CRA credit for a bank, but it was never intended for that purpose. The purpose was to help the people that already lived there, not bring in people who had got the loan anyway. So what we're doing is trying to help all of the civil rights leaders of all backgrounds that fought so hard for the Voting Rights Act, for the Housing Act, and for the CRA legislation to achieve the original goal of that law, was to reset the playing field and to provide opportunity to these banking deserts by turning on that water that we talked about and letting that credit flow where it needs to go.
Can you talk a little bit about the CRA credit for the people that may not be familiar?
Yeah, it's really simple. It's just redlining was, if you were in the Midwest, you could have been Jewish and you could have got redlining. If you were Asian in the West, if you were South, you were African American. Anytime you were in a highly concentrated area and you were middle to low income, banks would literally draw a red line around your community and not put loans in that area. And they were legally not, were able to not lend to you because you lived in a certain area. So these civil rights legislative laws basically said, well, banks, we recognize that you did that, so now we're going to make it a requirement that you have so many loans in these areas. Well, that's really hard, because the system, if you let the system as it is, if you believe it, and this is why we don't believe in, the efficacy of credit scores, because if you truly believe the credit scores as they are, then you have to believe that 55% of African Americans don't deserve to own a home. And that's not the world we live in. There's no place in America where half of a whole race shouldn't be able to own a home. That means your algorithm's wrong. It just has to be wrong. So we have to create something better. And so what we're saying is, let's look at what people can afford. If you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 a month in rent, you can afford 90% of that to pay for a mortgage. So we're basing everything off of what people are paying in rent and going below that and finding something they can afford. It's not rocket science. But what I'm not going to do is tell people because they got a Discover card or a credit card that somebody got sick and they had to max out a card, or the car got broke down so they had to get to work and they use it as a safety net, that utilization on that credit card tanks them to a credit score that says they cannot own the house that they live in, or they cannot be trusted to pay a mortgage when the entire time they were paying their rent on time. Those are two totally different things.
Well, one thing that I love about you is that this isn't a job, it's a lifestyle. So that's really cool. I admire that. So we're at time. So is there any final words that you would love to leave the crowd with?
Yeah, I mean, enjoy Atlanta while you're here, and just recognize that you're in a special place, and we're really honored that Fintech South chose Atlanta. This city is special. The people are special. Hopefully we all can stay in touch. You can find us at ReadyLife.com, Redemption Holding on Instagram. But we want you to be a part of our journey. And if ever we can be helpful, if there's any space or place that myself or Dr. King, can lend our efforts, our energy, our time, and our talent to support the causes of making this world a little bit better for all of us, please don't hesitate to reach out. Enjoy Atlanta.
Thank you, guys.